generate a few degrees of rotation. So discharging a whole magazine will be typically speed you up to about 15 RPM, which would probably take you out of the firefight as you tried to slow yourself down. And it's worth noting right now that a special type of gun was actually developed in the 1960s, which had a whole lot less recoil. Gyrojets, they don't fire conventional slugs, conventional bullets. Instead, they fire miniature rockets, which is pretty darn awesome. They leave the barrel relatively slowly, and the barrel actually has holes in it for the jet exhaust to come out. Once they leave the barrel, they get faster and faster and faster until they're about 20 meters out, in which case they're going about Mach 1. And they're much bigger than conventional slugs, but the recoil is about 1/10 of what you'd expect. I mean, this is pretty cool. The gyrojets are awesome in so many ways. They are called gyrojets, incidentally, because the little rocket exhausts in the rear are set up in such a way that they spin the bullet for stability. These actually appeared in the movie You Only Live Twice, which is one of my favourite Bond movies ever. You know, it has ninjas, and it was written by Roald Dahl. Yeah, you know Roald Dahl wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He did the screenplay for that and helped introduce ninjas to the Western world. But yeah, I mean, these things, they're pretty rare, pretty collector's items. They never were necessary, and they're very, very expensive to fire. I hear it costs like $100 per round these days. In a real future space gunfight, the recoil would probably be even less of an issue, because if you're a smart person, the first thing you do is you get into cover. And from there, you probably have plenty of things to brace yourself against or hold on to correct the very small amount of recoil you get. And if you are some sort of badass trooper special forces that's flying across the gaps between spacecraft on your jetpack, well, guess what? Your jetpack is going to be smart enough to correct for the gun recoil. It will keep you straight, and you won't have to worry about the small amount of thrust that your gun is giving you. Anyway, the next major design consideration would be the thermal properties, or the thermal tolerances. Now, in space, the difference in temperature between shadow and direct sunlight could be very large. In the famous Meanderings report, they assumed a temperature range of -250 Fahrenheit to +250 Fahrenheit, and I'm not going to convert that to centigrade because I can't do that in my head, right? Seriously though, I mean, they probably overestimated this because they were coming up with ideas, and they wanted worst case scenarios. Now, one of the problems with such a large temperature range is that the temperature of the propellant will affect the way it burns, and they expected that they would have something like 25 to 50% difference in their muzzle velocities depending upon how hot the weapon was. On top of that, every time you fire it, there's a chemical reaction in there that's generating hot gases, and these hot gases heat up the weapon. Now, if you have an automatic weapon, you're progressively heating up the barrel, and the weapons are designed so that they will be cooled down by the ambient air around it. In the vacuum, of course, there's no ambient air, so these things are going to get hotter faster, and it's much harder for them to get rid of the heat in the vacuum of space. Even if you were inside with an atmosphere, it's worth pointing out that the flow of air is in part driven by convection, and if there's no gravity, you will not have heat convection, and therefore your cooling will be different. So it's conceivable that a weapon designed to be fired in space might return to the good old days of water-cooled, or at least liquid-cooled weapons. And another area of concern, which was covered by those meandering weapon-oriented nerds, was the problems faced by mechanical devices, or any mechanical device operating in a vacuum. You may not know this, but in a vacuum, it's possible for similar types of metal to weld themselves spontaneously to each other. If you have two identical kinds without the barrier, the protective barrier of air, they will weld themselves together and stick. Similarly, there's also a problem with oil. Oil is used to lubricate all these mechanisms and, keep them from touching. Well, the oil will also evaporate in a vacuum. Now, these are considerations, they're not insurmountable problems. There's ways to lubricate things, and there's also ways to make sure that the materials you're using are protected from the possibility of vacuum welding. But a gun that was designed for use on the Earth would probably not have these considerations, and it's quite likely after firing a while, or firing a few rounds, or if it had been sitting in a vacuum for a while, that it simply wouldn't work reliably, or at least it wouldn't reload after the first shot. Finally, there's the ergonomics of operating a weapon while wearing a bulky pressure suit. The gloves on your typical spacesuit are really quite unwieldy things, and it's very unlikely you would be able to take a spacesuit glove and put it inside the trigger guard. So the designs that were offered in the Meanderings paper, they actually featured wide triggers and no trigger guards, so that they were easy enough to grasp and easy enough to operate, even if you were a Kerbal working with those mittens. So the whole point is the regular guns would work just fine. You would just need to make them space ready. You would need to give them different triggers and make sure their mechanisms were secure against the rigors of deep space, of the vacuum and the temperature range. However, it's worth pointing out that firearms have in fact flown in space, and they've even visited the International Space Station. The TP-82 survival pistol was a standard part of every Soyuz survival kit. I mean, actually calling it a pistol is a bit misleading. It's more like a sawed-off double-barreled shotgun with a rifle underneath. I mean, also you could launch flares from the shotguns. It was basically designed as a survival weapon. The butt could be taken off, and it would actually be a machete with a sheath, obviously, so you didn't slice your arm off when you're firing it. It was like a Swiss Army knife of firearms. Now, the TP-82 was the brainchild of Alexei Leonov. If you remember, Alexei was, of course, the first man to walk in space on Voskhod 2. What you may have not remembered about Voskhod 2 was as they were finishing the mission, the guidance system failed and they ended up landing in a remote part of Siberia in the middle of the forest. The astronauts had to spend the night in their capsule before they were met by rescuers, and they were particularly worried that the local wildlife might be a little scary, especially since it was mating season. They did in fact have a 9mm pistol, but as I understand it, Russian bears would probably just be made angry if you shot them with that. This experience convinced Leonov that something more appropriate needed to be carried on future missions. Now, as it turns out, NASA didn't really want to advertise the fact that there was a gun in space, and none of the astronauts that flew on the Soyuz have any photos of them training with it. But a couple of space tourists did. There are photos of Mark Shuttleworth and Anusha Ansari showing how it looks, and I think these are pretty cool collector's items, to be honest. But yeah, they don't fly those anymore because they stopped making the ammunition in 1987, and 20 years later they decided it was basically past its sell-by date, and they returned to using a 9mm pistol, with all the problems of shooting bears not being a very good idea. Even more recently, the crews have started voting on whether to carry the gun, and as I understand, past a certain date, no guns have been carried on the Soyuz, so space has been weapons-free for a while. Anyway, thankfully the use of these firearms in space has remained entirely in the realm of video games, and I hope it stays that way. I'm Scott Manley, fly safe.
Hello, I'm Sunny Williams. I'm up here on the International Space Station. So this is Node 2. This is a really cool module. Of course, most of these modules you see, they have 4 sides, and they're put together. That way we could sort of work on a flat plane, either a wall, a floor, another wall, or the ceiling. But, you know, again, all you have to do is turn yourself and your reference changes. The reason I'm bringing that up is because this is where 4 out of 6 of us sleep. And so people always ask about sleeping in space. Do you lie down? Are you in a bed? Not really, because it doesn't matter. You don't really have the sensation of lying down. You just sit in your sleeping bag. So here's one sleep station right here. I'm going in right now. You can follow me if you want. So I'm inside. It's sort of like a little phone booth, but it's pretty comfy. I've got a sleeping bag right here that we sleep in, so we don't have sort of like a little bit of a cover. We don't fly all over the place. But you know, you can sleep in any orientation. I have it feeling like I'm standing up right now, but like you saw, I'm on the floor. But it doesn't matter if I turn over and I sleep upside down. I don't have any sensation in my head that tells me that I'm upside down, so it really doesn't matter. The sleep station is also like a little office. We've got a computer in here. As you can see, we've got a couple little toys. I've got some books. I've got some clothes and other things that make it sort of like home. I'm coming out. And just for reference, that's one sleep station. This one's another. Right here. There's one on the ceiling, if you want to call it. Right here. And then there's a fourth on the other wall over here. So all of us sleep in a little bit of a circle. All right, come on back. There's more to show you. I know that there's some questions about how to use the bathroom and how do you actually live in space like normal, like at home. I mentioned real quickly about getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth and washing your face. Well, how do you do that? Well, here is the bathroom, essentially. You get up in the morning and we have a little kit, and it has all the essential things that you need, like your toothbrush and toothpaste and brush. See how much better the brush makes my hair look? I'm just joking. It still stands up straight. It doesn't matter where you are. It's always going to stand up straight while you're up in space. A lot of people ask about toothbrush and toothpaste. So, luckily enough, toothpaste, you can do it upside right this way, is sticky, and so it sticks to your toothbrush. No problem. Another cool thing is that water sticks to your toothbrush. You can see it. I'll have some water come out. Water is pretty neat up in space. It'll stick to your toothbrush. And it will make a big bubble. That's this side. Surface tension. And then you can drink it. So a lot of people ask about what do you do with the toothpaste after you brush your teeth. Two options. Swallow it, and it's sort of like mouthwash, but it tastes a little gross. Or you can just spit it out in a paper towel, and then you don't have to worry about it. Swallowing thing I wouldn't recommend at home. I'm only up here for 4 months, so it's not that bad. One of the most pressing questions about living in space, of course, is the bathroom. So let's take a look at that little piece of work. Come on in. Here we are at the throne. This is awesome. You might see you might have noticed the little moon on the outside. This is our orbital outhouse right here. And of course, it serves for two functions. Number 2, right here. I'll show you. But you see it's pretty small, so you have to have pretty good aim. Be ready to make sure things get let go the right direction. And it smells a little bit, so I'm closing it up. And that's, of course, for number 2. And this guy right here is for number 1. So they're sort of two slightly separate functions, but you can do a little, essentially both, by hanging on right here and doing number 1 and number 2. I might add it's color coded so you really don't get it mixed up, which is nice. This is yellows for number 1. And also there's a selection of paper. People always ask about toilet paper. What do you do with toilet paper? What kind of toilet paper do you have? We have gloves just because sometimes it does get messy. We have some Russian wipes, which are a little bit coarse if you like the coarse type of toilet paper. We have some nice tissues, which are nice and soft if you like soft toilet paper. We have Huggies, just for any cleanup. You know, we were all babies once, and this sort of helps. And then if things get really out of control, we have disinfectant wipes, just to make sure we clean up here. Because, you know, just like the water I showed you, the number 1 stuff can sort of go all over the place if you don't aim correctly. And did I mention both of these have a little bit of suction, so they should keep things going in the right direction. But, like I said, sometimes things get a little out of control if you are out of control yourself flying around. So we have lots of protective stuff. And of course, you do have your privacy. Here's a little door, so other people know that you're in there. Here's a pretty cool place. This is sort of like in your house where everybody meets in the morning. After you wash your face, brush your teeth, you want to find something for breakfast. And this is our kitchen. You might notice there's all sorts of foods here. It's like opening the refrigerator. You got all your different stuff that you want to have: drinks, meats, eggs, vegetables, cereals, bread, snacks. And that's a good place. That's where you find all the candy. Side dishes, and then some little power bars just in case. So we have all this type of food. Some of it is dehydrated, and so we have to hydrate it, fill it up with water. Some of it is already made, and then all we have to do is heat it up. So something like this, I'm pulling out barbecued beef brisket. Pretty yummy. Not only is this food made in the U.S., but we also have food here from Japan. We've got Russian food. As you can see, all these red containers are filled with food that's from Russia. And then we get some of our specialty stuff, some things that we like, some of our favorite stuff that your family can send up. In fact, I like fluffernutters, and so I got sent up some fluff so I could make my fluffernutter with peanut butter. So you have a lot of food up here, no problem. Now, I want to say where we are. So right now, we're in the Japanese laboratory. It's one laboratory out of many here on the International Space Station. It's actually on the left-hand side. If I was International Space Station and I was flying through space like this, my left hand would be where the Japanese laboratory is. So now again, we're on the right-hand side, all the way on the right of the International Space Station. This is Columbus, the European module. It has science experiments all over. You can see it looks a little bit crowded. And here we do a lot of our medical experiments. Here we are in the U.S. laboratory. Again, this is a laboratory with science experiments on all of the walls here, all sorts of stuff that we do. And one of the things we also do is we exercise. We have some exercise equipment on board the space station. We need to do that because we lose bone density and muscle mass while we're up here, and that's a result of not having to fight against gravity. So how we keep ourselves in shape with a bike, a treadmill, and a weightlifting machine. This is the bike. You notice the clipped pedals. So all you need to do is actually clip your feet in, and then you can start pedaling. You don't need a seat because you don't sit down. Actually, I haven't sat down for 6 months now, so you don't need any type of seat. Just make sure you're held in with your pedals. You probably see that the bike bounces around a little bit. As I move it, it's not steady and held to the wall firmly. And the reason for that is the space station is pretty big. You saw that there's also solar arrays on the space station. If we start putting any forces into the space station, it's going to make those solar arrays bounce around a little bit. So to prevent that, the machines bounce around a little bit, move around a little bit, and that way we don't put any forces onto the structure of the spacecraft out to the solar arrays. All right, a little farther on. Come on.
My temple's power has been expended. You are stronger than
I'm here with my two buddies in the airlock. Actually, these are two spacesuits that are ready, primed up to go outside, as we call it, to go do a spacewalk in case we have to do anything outside. Some of the things we do outside are just like inside, repairs. We have a lot of electrical boxes and machinery and solar arrays, in fact, that I talked about earlier, that are outside, and sometimes they don't work quite right. Remember, space is really cold and really hot, and it's also the vacuum of space with no pressure, and so some of the equipment doesn't work well all the time. So we might have to go out and do a spacewalk. Right behind me is actually the hatch that you go out into space, and right now we have it filled up with a couple other spacesuits because we've got 4 of them up here and some of our tools. But right behind here is the hatch in which you actually go right outside into the vacuum of space. The spacesuit is pretty big, as you can see. It's like being a football player. Part of the reason it's so big and bulky is because of this backside, this backpack. It's like going on a hike with a backpack, but the backpack and the suit weighs about 300 pounds. Luckily, in space, nothing really weighs anything, so you don't feel that it's so heavy. But we need to have such a big suit because that guy back there is essentially the heart of the spacecraft. I call this actually a spacecraft. It has all the oxygen for you. It has all the carbon dioxide removal system for you. It also has a heating and cooling system to make sure to regulate our body temperatures while we're outside. It also has a computer, so it tells you on a display here if there's anything that's going wrong with the suit, if we're running out of oxygen, if we have too much carbon dioxide, or any type of electrical problem. So it's a pretty awesome little spacecraft, and actually got to go out, use my little spacecraft a couple times, and it worked like a charm. Lucky that it works very nice. You might want to see what the helmet looks like, because it's cool too, because we don't usually go out like this, so you usually can see when the helmet's open. So you can see what it looks like inside. Somebody's little head would be inside of here. So you can see, you can turn your head all the way around while you're inside of there, but the helmet stays still. So that's determines how far you could see. And it's usually pretty sunny out there, so we have to wear our sunglasses, and this is our sunglasses right here, which make you look pretty cool. Like a glass bottom boat. This is the cupola. It sticks down below the space station. It's one of those places you find yourself hanging out in all the time because all you want to do is look back at our planet. I think some questions I had were about what do you do in your free time? And you can't help but want to just come to the cupola and look outside as much as you can. And a lot of folks, I play this game with myself about where we're flying over the Earth. I try to come in here and just guess. After being here for a little while, you can sort of figure it out. You can tell different cloud types over different continents. You can tell different soil types over different continents. So let's see. And then, of course, there's a lot of ocean. So usually we're over the ocean at first glance. I will tell you in just a moment where we are. Okay. Right now we're right over Africa. It's a little bit cloudy, as you can tell. So we're right over the continent of Africa. Hey, what's that? I think that's a Soyuz spacecraft. That's the spacecraft that's taken us home to planet Earth today. Oh my gosh. We might have to go take a look at that. That's pretty cool. It's a little bit smaller than the rest of the spacecraft, the space station, so you'll see if we go there, it'll be a little bit more crammed. But we're going, you can look all the way back to the back of the spacecraft, which is where the Russian segment is. And then you can look all the way forward to the front of the spacecraft, where the Japanese laboratory, the European laboratory, and the American laboratory are. And then back to the solar arrays where we started this morning when we were looking out the Japanese window.
Your core is under attack. Yes. My magic flows through the temple.
So other questions that were here are, what would you recommend as a job, if so, and to what type of person would want to be an astronaut? I think people who would like to explore, of course, people who like math and science. That's what this is all about. We have people in the office who are doctors, teachers, veterinarians, engineers, pilots. So all sorts of people become astronauts, and I think if you see, it's just sort of cool. So I think people who like to do a little adventure and like to do cool stuff probably usually become astronauts. Hey, one thing I didn't show you, or I talked about but I didn't show you, was the exercise. Another piece of exercise device, which is the advanced resistive exercise, and that's what this is right here. This is ARED, and you could probably see this bar. You just do a little bit of maneuvering here. Stand by. You have to set it up just like at any other gym.
Find something else to fight over.
Hold on. Show you how this works. You can see you can change your attitude just by going from one module to the next, going up from the cupola down here. This is what we call the ARED. And with this, you can lift weights based on vacuum in these cylinders, just like you do at home at a gym. For example, if I wanted to do a squat, I could do it like this. Oops. I should need some weight on this thing. I'm not lifting with anything, so it's too easy. One of the cool things you could do things that you can't do at home. For example, single leg squats with just one leg, because the other leg, you won't fall over. So all sorts of stuff. You can also do bench press. We have a bench that we could add on here, so you can work on your beach muscles. Hey, Aki, what are you doing down there? This is one of the cool things about space, too. It sort of looks like there's a big old hole here, but you don't even think twice about it. You can just jump over the hole, or if you want, you can go jump into the hole. I'm coming down. Woo! Then you can come right back up again, like Superman. Woo! We're lucky we have a really cool big space station that you can fly around in. That's actually called the PMM. You might have saw it out the window. It's a big silver canister. What's really great about that is it's essentially our closet in our pantry, or whatever you want to call it. We have extra food down there, we have extra clothes, we actually throw the trash out down there. So it's nice and organized, and we have all of our stuff that we need while we're working in all these other modules all stowed in this location down here. And it's a lot of fun to play in. So we're going into the Russian segment. Be ready. You don't need a passport either. It goes a lot farther back than this. We'll go take a trip and say hello to the boys down there in just a minute. Well, let's do that first, actually, and then we'll go down to the Soyuz at the very end. This is Yevgeny.
Hi.
Doing a little tour. This is the FGB, and what's cool about this module, it is actually the very first piece of the space station that came up in 1998. The space station has been around for about now, manned for 12 years, but it's been up in space for about 14 years.